Hello, welcome to Israel Update. I'm Gadi Taub in Tel Aviv, and as usual, in Washington is with us Mike Doran, Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute. Hello, Mike.
Hello, Dr. Taub.
Oh, we're formal again. Israel is excited over the return of the hostages and also tense. Some of the scenes are incredibly touching. Here, for example, is Emily Hand, who we will also discuss later. But look, she's back. This is her sister. Her father's Irish, her mother's Israeli. We'll be back with this girl. Look at this moment of tenderness. The dogs. What hell she must have been through. We'll be back with Emily in another context at the end of this show. So, Mike, it's very hard to talk rationally about these things when emotions are so high. When you look at these people and their anticipation, the way Hamas is playing with their emotions, canceling, postponing. You have news all night whether the next phase of the deal will come into play or not, and in the meantime, Hamas is playing for the international audience the benevolent freedom fighters. So let me screen another clip for you if I can manage
People
it all at once.
they're playing the people you call to when you want someone to help your grandmother across the street.
Yeah. So this is footage of the hostages returning. They made them wave their hands and say hi. They played benevolent here, and we have to remember that some of these people had their family members slaughtered, some in front of their own eyes. Here are some of the foreign workers.
The girl on the crutches was at the dance festival where people were she presumably was shot. I don't know that for a fact, but that's probably what happened to her leg. But where people were shot down in front of her. So
yeah, and some of the hostages have their other parts of their families still at the hands of Hamas, and Hamas is waging an international campaign to deny the fact that they dismembered children alive in front of their parents and other horrors, which we don't need to subject. This is the Hamas logo at the end of this film. So this is supposed to tell us that Hamas, there's actually Abu Ali Express, from whose telegram I took this video, also notes that in Arabic at one point, one of the Hamas persons tells a Red Cross worker, speak to the hostages so we can film it. And indeed they do. So, Mike, this will be at the center of our attention, but not on the emotional side, but rather asking what the implications of the deal are and what's going to be next. We also will touch on the internal debates or fractions or even rifts in Israeli society in the wake of this deal. We'll also speak about withdrawal of government funding from Haaretz, which is one of the most important sources for many around the world for Israeli news. And of course, Haaretz, as Israelis know, is slanted, or at least I'll quote the minister who wants to withdraw government funds from Haaretz, saying that it's inciting against Israel. And we'll also have a chance to look at the worst and dumbest takes of the week on the news. But first, Mike, to you for the bulletin.
Okay, Gadi, thank you. The bulletin is really short because it really all the news about Israel today is all about the pause in the fighting and the hostage deal. We are, of course, halfway through the deal, which began on Friday morning. We had two exchanges of hostages, Israeli hostages being held by Israeli and international hostages being held by Hamas and other groups in Gaza, in exchange for Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails. There were 13, Hamas released 13 on Friday, all women and children, and then another 13 on Saturday, again, all women and children. On Saturday, that group included 6 members of a single extended family. from the kibbutz Be'eri. Is
And,
really
and I don't usually interrupt you in the headlines, but as we speak, 4 more hostages are brought to the Rafiah passing. Yeah.
Oh, okay, okay, and also today, Sunday, a Russian Israeli was released, and Hamas put out a statement saying that this was in thanks. This is not part of the regular deal, just in thanks to President Putin for his supportive position with Hamas. Israeli leaders now face a dilemma about whether to restart the war on Tuesday morning. They said that they will restart it. But there are going to be attempts to extend the ceasefire as long as possible, possibly with new with more hostage deals. In other news, there's really one major issue, and that's that a tanker in the off the coast of Yemen called the Central Park. That's the name of the tanker. Was seized probably by the Houthis. We don't know yet. This is the third such incident. Of course, on the 19th, the Galaxy Leader, was a vehicle transport vessel, was hijacked by the Houthis. And then last Friday, there was an attack on a tanker by what seems to have been an Iranian drone. Again, who sent the drone, whether it was the Iranians or the Houthis, is unclear. Presumably, it was the Houthis, but nobody has claimed responsibility for that attack. All of these tankers have international crews, but they are owned or partially owned by Israeli billionaires. That's the excuse the Houthis are using for doing this. And that's all of the major news, Gadi.
So before we delve into the implications, the question, what next, and will the war be restarted? I have just one comment on the other side of the deal. Who is being released from Israeli jails? So they're telling us these are women and children. These are indeed some of them women and some of them teenagers, all of whom attempted to murder Israeli, or most of whom attempted to murder Israelis, and they say there's no blood on their hands because they failed, because the people they attacked did not die. But it's worth noting that from the 150 names of the list that Israel is to release, about half are from East Jerusalem. And this it can't be a coincidence if the number is so big. And you have to take into account that this may start a new intifada in Jerusalem, because you're now releasing 70, I would call them terror cadets, that have already proven themselves. They're expected to go back to be heroes and shaheeds, and there must be a plan behind the conception of releasing so many residents of East Jerusalem.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the goals of a major goal of the operation on October 7th was to undermine the Palestinian Authority, Abu Mazen, Fatah, and make Hamas the representative, to increase its popularity and to make it the representative at home and abroad of the Palestinian people. And when you look at those release of prisoners, and you look at when the buses come, everyone is out there with green Hamas flags, not Palestinian flags, Hamas flags. I think Hamas is working to present itself as the sole representative of the Palestinian people, and succeeding, and to a certain extent, for sure.
So let's look at the price first, Mike, because when we last talked, Israel had almost complete control over the northern portion of the Gaza Strip. And as you mentioned, the Hamas completely lost control of that side. So that's where the military forces of Israel were at the beginning of the ceasefire. So let's start with the question, is Israel now going to lose control of the north?
No, I don't think so. I think that there were pictures that Hamas made a lot out of Israelis retreating. But I think that was just a matter of moving their forces into very defensible positions. Because one of the things that they're worried about, rightly so, is that Hamas is going to use this pause in order to organize itself and plan attacks to carry out attacks on the Israeli forces. So Hamas is gathering intelligence on where the Israeli forces are. They're gathering their forces. They're equipping them, and there's going to be when the battle resumes, there are going to be some very serious attacks against the Israelis. So the Israelis have to put themselves in defensible positions. The war is going to resume again. I don't know if it's going to start on Tuesday morning. Hamas might extend this with more hostage deals, but we're gonna see more fighting.
And so you don't think that they'll be able to actually stop the war, because some of the forces seem to be maneuvering in that direction. International pressure, European countries. Where does the Biden administration stand on resuming the war?
The Biden administration is walking a line between supporting Israel and giving it rather significant support, and also holding all of its, particularly its European and its Arab allies, maintaining legitimacy with them. And so it to them, it talks about humanitarian concerns, also political concerns about the day after the war, but and then it conveys those to the Israelis. But so far, it has not called for a ceasefire. I think it will, if Hamas comes forward with a new hostage deal. I think the Americans will talk to the Israelis about it. They may put some pressure on the Israelis, but I don't think they're going to come out and at this stage demand a kind of unconditional ceasefire. I'll be very surprised. I don't see that as in the cards at all. On the contrary, I think that the Israeli, as I think I said in our last episode, I think the Israelis were buying with this humanitarian pause that we've had, because we're not just seeing hostage deals. Also, the Israelis are allowing a lot of fuel and humanitarian supplies into Gaza, which strengthen Hamas. Of course, they help the common people, but they are distributed ultimately by Hamas, and Hamas uses it to maintain control over the population. So the Israelis were reluctant to do that, but they have done that, and I think there's a kind of unspoken deal, maybe even explicit deal with the Americans, that the Americans will understand that this is only temporary.
So you're betting on the war resuming?
I am. I'm not, like I said, not necessarily Tuesday. Maybe it'll be 10 days from now, maybe a little longer, but it's going to resume. What this reminds me of, Gadi, is I don't know how many of our viewers are up on the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict, but it reminds me of the War of Independence, which had several, was broken up by ceasefires and several different stages to it. Each stage was different than the previous one.
But then the big pause, the pause in the summer of 48, was when the IDF was reconstructed, and that enabled Israel to win the war. So we had the pause in order for us to regroup, because there were 4 or 5 state-sponsored forces, armies, invading Israel, along with other militias. So Israel was on the defensive, and here Israel is in the attack, and the attack is stopped. And many Israelis say that this policy is completely misguided, because Hamas is using the hostage card because it's under pressure, and the last thing you should do when your enemy is with its back against the wall is to loosen the pressure, and that's what Israel did. So there are. I'd like for you to comment on this, on the military side and the implications, before we move to the internal debates in Israel, which I want to update you about, which are creating real rifts. So, but first, on the military, what price are we going to pay for this? for this pause.
Well, you're gonna you lost momentum for sure, and you gave Hamas an opportunity when it wasn't under fire to collect intelligence and to, as I said before, and to organize itself. It also, you gave it some propaganda victories. It was able to put out pictures that were very striking of all of the devastation in the north, and of people going back, seeing their homes destroyed. You also had civilians trying to move north and being shot by the Israelis, unarmed civilians. I'm sure they were pushed by Hamas because the Israelis made it clear that they would not allow civilians to come from the south to the north. But all of that, was a serious propaganda victory. You had the Spanish and Belgian politicians at Rafah, who came originally to Israel to show support, ended up making statements that were supportive of Hamas. So that was an unfortunate, from the Israeli point of view, that was unfortunate. But just once the fighting stops, the resumption is going to come at a cost, and I expect that we're going to see a significant Iranian escalation when the fighting resumes, and that's because the fighting is going to move now. The Israelis are still, if you remember the picture, in the north of the Gaza Strip, they were still moving eastward and to take over all of the north, but they're also going to start moving in the south for Han Yunis. That's Yahya Sinwar's hometown. He's in the bunker there. The hostages are mainly in the bunker in Han Yunis. And so if Israel takes Han Yunis and Rafah, which it has to do to win the war, and which means to achieve the war aims that the Israeli government has announced, it needs to take both Han Yunis and Rafah. Rafah is the border crossing from Egypt over to Gaza Strip, and there are massive tunnels from Egypt to Gaza that allow the weapons to be smuggled in, and it's also an economic portal, you should say, to Egypt, which if Hamas controls it, it gets money, and it controls all of the trade. And so if you want to actually topple Hamas, you have to own those tunnels, and you have to take over Rafah, and Iran is going to want to stop that. So I expect that we'll see more violence from the Houthis, more attacks on international shipping, and who knows what else.
Hezbollah possibly?
What's that?
Possibly in the north?
Hezbollah will, yes, Hezbollah will up the temperature, but Hezbollah is afraid of, is a bit deterred somewhat, but yes, it will turn up the heat. And there are things that are going to be surprises that we're not ready for.
Yeah.
For example, Iranian-backed militias from Iraq attacking Jordan or going for the Jordanian border.
Yeah.
The things that Iran has been sitting and planning this over the last few weeks, and they're gonna pull some rabbits out of their hat that are going to be pretty ugly rabbits.
Definitely something for us to watch, because the Biden administration makes a real effort to isolate the conflict around Hamas so that it doesn't begin to fray its appeasement towards Iran, a subject like that we often discuss here. I want to move to the internal Israeli debate, and perhaps begin by showing you this. These signs are all over Israel. What it says here is Tinokot, Kshishim, Nashim, Gvarim, babies, the elderly, women, and men are still held as hostages by Hamas. And these signs everywhere are financed with a lot of money, because they're huge billboards all over the country. There's other forms of propaganda. And you ask yourself, who is behind this, and what for? Because the pressure that this puts is not on Hamas. The pressure is obviously on the Israeli government. And when you think of a question like hostages, so you are playing a poker game with the devil, what you want to do is at least fake indifference. You want to show the devil that you do whatever you wish with the hostages, we won't stop, even if that's not your real stance. That's the stance you want to play. So obviously smart people understand that the noise around the hostage question, the pressure on the government, is not a I'm phrasing this very carefully, is not a positive influence on our ability to release the hostages.
It doesn't help give Israel, the Israeli government, leverage in the negotiations. It undermines the leverage.
It undermines our leverage. So why and who are doing this? And I don't think I have a comprehensive answer, but I guess that my answer is at least relevant to some of the manipulators who have infiltrated the committee of the relatives of the hostages.
Where I feel where you're going is you're saying this is not simply out of a humanitarian concern that all these pictures have been put up. There are interested parties who want to undermine Netanyahu by putting these hostages around his neck. Is that the
exactly? Yes, and we have screened in one of our previous episodes some of the divergence within that group early on in the conflict, and many of the parents and the relatives of the hostages have been saying, take politics out of here. We don't want politics. But there was a faction, as we showed in some footage that we screened, that was putting this, that was demonstrating and picketing across Kaplan Street, which is the venue of the anti-reform weekly demonstrations. And also it is opposite the other side of the street where the cabinet sometimes meets when it meets in Tel Aviv. And some of the others have been saying, no, we can't demonstrate here. It's not a continuation of the demonstration against the government. Now, here's the more speculative and more, I guess, horrifying aspect in this. Among the demonstrators against the government,
you're choosing your words carefully, because I feel you being very careful in your,
because I think some people are being innocently dragged along, and those who actually do things from out of the
so there's a cynical group that's doing this for political purposes, but there are other people who are acting because their loved ones have been taken hostage, and you're choosing your words carefully because
of them, because obviously
you don't want to color all of them with this brush.
Yes, but I think that the brush I'm going to color some with is justified, and here's the calculation. They have been saying, first of all, it's strange that the advisors and the operators of some of these anti-government movement before the war have adopted the hostage question with such vehemence. Then we see the huge billboards. We know the anti-government demonstrations were backed by billionaires and had huge amounts of money, which are now needed for the billboard. So here's the calculation, Mike, that I'm now guessing, but I think it's an educated guess. They have been saying for a long time that Netanyahu is a worse enemy of Israel than Iran. Think of Never Trumpers. That was the volume of the craze. Netanyahu is like, for them, the devil. And if Netanyahu is a worse enemy than Iran,
I know lots of people, lots of very intelligent, well-informed, sincere people who believe exactly what you're saying. Israelis who believe.
So if they do, and they think that Iran is a lesser enemy, surely Hamas is a lesser enemy than Iran. So in their calculation, if they manage to use the hostages issue in order to topple Netanyahu, even at the price of stopping the war, they think we can deal with Hamas later. Whereas Netanyahu is for them like cancer. It has to be treated immediately, even with chemotherapy. So this is chemotherapy against Netanyahu, and they're willing to use it in order to stop the war, because they know that if Netanyahu stops the war, then he has no political.
They know that the minute minute the war, the minute there's an extended ceasefire and life goes back to, and the war is not the everything in the news, and there are other issues discussed, that there's going to be a call for him to resign, for a committee of inquiry, for new elections or whatever, and that'll be the end of him.
That, I think, is the calculation. Now,
by the way, I can give you, I don't know how much I want to feed your imagination on this, but I can give you this scenario. The simple scenario is that the United States, the Biden administration, which would also like to see Netanyahu gone, will make an issue of something that we brought up here, that is settlers on the West Bank. And it will put pressure on Netanyahu to carry out some kind of initiative on the West Bank that will cause a crisis in the coalition between him on the one hand and Smotrich and Ben Gvir and others, and there'll be a crisis inside the coalition, and that will push it to elections.
So what you're describing adds another component to what looks to those manipulators, I guess, as a perfect storm, where they can manipulate everything against Netanyahu, but sacrifice victory in the war.
Let me choose my words very carefully too. I'm not saying that's happening. I'm saying that the kind of people that you're talking about, this is the scenario that they would have.
So this fits into I think, simpler rift in Israeli society around the deal. Generally, the press try to portray the deal as within the consensus, but that is not the case at all. So I want to show you now a woman named Nitzan Gabay, whose sister Shani Gabay was abducted by Hamas, and by the time that we speak now, it was discovered that Shani is regrettably already dead. But listen to what Nitzan had to say to the representative of the government.
בוגדים באחותי, אתם בוגדים בחיילים שלי, אתם בוגדים בכולם, אתם בוגדים בנו בתור המשפחות שלהם. אם אני צריכה להילחם על משהו, זה להילחם איתכם. שלא תיתנו להם דלק, שלא תיתנו להם אוכל, שלא תיתנו להם מים, ומצידי שלא ייכנס לאף אחד. לא לחטופים, לא לעזתים, ואם אנחנו נגביל את הכל. גם כשאולי אחותי נמצאת ביניהם. אבל מבחינתי צריך לסגור אותם ולהגיד להם, עד שאתם לא נותנים לי את החטופים שלי ואת הגופות שיש אצלכם שחטפתם, אתם לא מקבלים כלום. שבא לי להגיד לחבר שלי, תביא לי את הנשק שלך ואני אכנס לשם, כי אף אחד אחר לא עושה את זה.
Wow, Gadi, that is very powerful, very, very powerful. I find myself in talking about this issue, I'm actually hesitant to discuss it because you understand that the decisions that people have to make here, both the families and the political leaders, are so difficult and they're so emotionally fraught that you don't want to be disrespectful in any way. But on the other hand, as serious analysts, we have to talk about these things because people have to make calculations here, including calculations about the war and about politics and everything else. It's really tough.
And also about the hostages that are still with Hamas. So let me portray the dilemma in these terms. If Israel had taken a strong stand against any compromise with Hamas, other than complete surrender, then the two aims of the war, disarming Hamas and destroying Hamas and releasing the hostages, would have converged. But if the hostages issue begins to fragment in this way and we start doing deals, then what happens is that the two war aims, destroying Hamas and releasing the hostages, are now in conflict. And whenever you want hostages, you delay the destruction of Hamas. So what some of the hostages have been saying, contrary to the group that I described as using the hostages issue in order to topple the government, is to say, no, we are behind the government. And in order to win this war, you have to put the national before the private. And this is also probably the best way to release the rest of the hostages. Because if you are giving Hamas the impression that you are going to, as Ehud Barak foolishly said in some international interview, he said Israel will do anything, he said, short of going back to the countries we came from. We'll do anything to release our prisoner. You're just encouraging Hamas.
I don't, but just as an aside, I listened to the statements of Ehud Barak, and I don't understand what that guy thinks he's doing. I really don't. It's the other one he made was about the Israelis built the tunnels under Shifa Hospital, which is
well,
crazy.
I will be even more careful now and say this. The people that I think may be wanting to topple Netanyahu, even at the expense of losing the war, are, I don't know if there are Barak disciples or Barak's messengers, but they come from the radical circles for whom Barak was an anti-Netanyahu hero. Whether, he's been, Barak, I don't know how many of our viewers know this, but Barak, in some private video with some of the organizers of these were Air Force people, the anti-Netanyahu demonstration, said he has a historian friend who told him that if corpses will float in the Yarkon River, which is at the north of Tel Aviv, and he emphasized corpses of Jews killed by Jews, then he said the Israeli people will call on you because there is no one else. So this is like a biblical prophecy on LSD, right? This is like deranged, aggrandized, megalomanic dream.
So it's a strange.
Of course, he had a disclaimer. He said, of course, I never want this to happen. But my historian friend says it turned out later.
It was that I saw that video and I thought at the time, man, you have a strange imagination. I want to disagree with you slightly about I don't know that this pause is the mistake that you make it out to be. Again, it's very difficult for me as an outsider to throw my opinion about this, but let me just, as an analyst, let me just say, the government had to weigh a number of factors, including all of the pressure from the international community for the humanitarian on the humanitarian question, and including the United States. The United States needs to hold together a coalition, a global coalition, and it's under a lot of pressure from its friends to shut this thing down. And if Israel loses the United States, it will not be able to continue the war. So I am sure that on some level this is a negotiation with the Americans. And then another thing, Hamas was starting, I believe, to kill hostages and to claim that it was from Israeli bombing, and so. The Israelis wanted to show that there is another way that this can happen, show their own public and to show the world. They had a lot of difficult issues to weigh here, and there are, as they go to Khan Yunis and they start bombing the tunnels in Khan Yunis, there's a good chance that they're going to kill some of their own, and if they don't kill their own, Hamas is going to start killing their own and saying that they did as well. So this is a very, very hard subject, I think.
Yeah, we need to move on, but I'll say one more thing from my side of the argument. It doesn't necessarily support my argument because it's slightly different. But some of the parents of the soldiers who lost their lives fighting in Gaza are saying, the lives of our sons and daughters are no less important, and are we going to keep losing lives in order to save the hostages while we are reckless about risking our own soldiers with these pauses? These subjects will be with us, Mike, probably
I think the government, they're not going to say it, but I think the government's answer to that, the Netanyahu government's answer to that is the number of people that we were able to get out, and the fact that they were women and babies and children in this circumstance. This is the equivalent of, there's a building over there, and there are 50 women and children in there, and we're going to send soldiers to go free them. Some soldiers are going to die, but this is the calculation that we make. I think that's the kind of way that they thought of it. When Hamas started, I know for a fact from sources of my own, when Hamas started these negotiations, the first thing that they said was that if there was a pause, they would give Israel a list of the hostages that they had, the names. So that in the end, and the Israelis said, no, we're going to keep fighting. But then they came forward with a proposal, once they were under a lot of pressure, to release a significant number. And it made sense to do this.
Yeah. All right. Our next subject is slightly lighter, and this is the proposal by the Minister of Communication, Dr. Shlomo Karhi, to withdraw government subscriptions for Haaretz and government ads for Haaretz. He said because Haaretz is acting against the interests of Israel in the middle of a war. So there's been a general outcry. I saw Jack Tapper on CNN saying that the Netanyahu government is attacking the freedom of speech or the freedom of the press or something like that. But of course, what they're attacking is government subsidies for Haaretz. Apparently, Haaretz has a huge number of subscriptions paid for by the state all across the public sector, including the army, including Shabak, the General Security Service, including police, including the courts and the rest of the public sector, and also the government posts ads with the Haaretz when it has, do you call them tenders? When it has some job offering openings and stuff, they're obliged to publicize them. And we have laws that date back not before the internet but before television that says that they have to print them in the printed press. Now, of course, the government can offer jobs through the internet, so that law is also obsolete, but still Haaretz makes money on it. And the argument that the minister made is that the Haaretz works for the enemy at a time of war.
Just an editorial footnote here for our what do we have? We have viewers, listeners. That Haaretz has this status in Israel of the New York Times in the United States. It's read by the elite, and it's left wing.
The paper of record in Israel, but Haaretz has moved to quite radical extremes. So on the day after the massacre, the first editorial said that there is one person who's clearly responsible for the massacre, and that is Benjamin Netanyahu. Imagine the New York Times, the woke New York Times, being transported back to September 11 and on September 12, publishing an editorial by the editorial board that says that the person most responsible for the attacks of September 11, the person most responsible is George W. Bush. So that was the day after the attack. And then the next day, I want to read a piece for you. I'll read one paragraph of this by Amira Haas, who is the Haaretz correspondent for Gaza. And to say that she's a radical leftist is to seriously understate the issue. And she wrote this. This is stunning. Things were suddenly turned upside down, and the nightmare of Palestinian routine burst the veneer of phony normality that had characterized the lives of Israelis for decades. Hamas trampled over it with a sudden blow it delivered, revealing its military ingenuity and its ability to plan, to keep its plans secret, and to create diversions. Its operatives showed creativity when they used different methods to break through the walls of the world's largest prison, where Israel holds captive 2 million souls.
The world's largest prison.
Its armed men ventured on a journey willing to sacrifice their own lives, knowing that many of them will be killed. And And then she said some of them killed Israelis in what looked like an orgy of revenge, and their commanders failed to stop, or even for tactical reasons. So this is an unbelievable text. It's unbelievable. She's gushing over the creativity of the people who put babies in ovens.
The orgy of revenge that the commanders failed to stop. This was I will say she gave a nod to it in the end there. That was all planned. It was all planned. The orgy of revenge. It was designed.
Of course it is. But the thing is not just that Amira Haas is on the outlayer of the deranged woke left, who compared Israeli bombing of Gaza to the Holocaust, not what Hamas did to the Holocaust. She's, by the way, a daughter of Holocaust survivors. So this may be like a very extreme case of Stockholm syndrome. And so this is just a guess about her personal psychological makeup.
Yeah,
which is
let's not worry about it.
Yeah, but what is interesting is that the paper saw this as a fit text to print 2 days after the massacre. Israelis were dazed, Mike. People were walking around. I was in New York after September 11. That's how Israelis felt. They were walking in a dream, in a nightmare. And then you publish a text about the creativity of Hamas, and I didn't read you everything, but then she had a joke.
I didn't realize that this was. I didn't realize that this was 2 days afterwards.
That is 2 days after the massacre. So this is a very extreme thing to do, and Haaretz has been ever since portraying. We talked just earlier in this conversation about people who think that Netanyahu is a worse enemy of Israel than Hamas. If you read Haaretz, this is constantly they're banging on this. Netanyahu. They're trying to isolate him as the sole responsible person, as if everyone knew what was going on, and Netanyahu is responsible for not taking steps to prevent it, and all the rest. So this controversy is also at least in the small teapot of the Israeli press, it's creating quite a steer. I wonder if you had an American paper publishing this, what would be the reaction? Publishing something like that about September 11, I mean.
Yeah, of course we had stuff like that afterwards. Not so much, I think, from the New York Times, but you remember there was Ward Churchill, the professor. People saw the craziness of academia, which is, of course, where all this comes from. Ward Churchill said that this was the chickens come home to roost because of all of our colonial policies, colonial and racist policies. Ward Churchill, fake Native American.
I was, since I was there, I was also struck by the fact that the MESA, what are the
Middle Eastern Studies Association.
Yeah, the Middle Eastern Studies Association. The Bush administration immediately opened programs for teaching Arabic in order to train intelligence people. And MESA took an ad, I think it was in the New York Times, to say, don't go to these programs because this is just the extension of colonialism. So, in academia, under the Edward Said paradigm, what happened is that the scholars of the Middle East stopped studying the Middle East and started studying themselves. They started looking for biases in their own text and just closed their eyes to what was happening in the Middle East. So I don't know if the chickens came to roost or we just ignored the fact that the eagles were nesting right at our doorstep, if I can drag the metaphor that far. So now let's talk about some of the worst and dumbest takes.
But before we do,
okay.
let me just again for the viewers, remind them all, if they don't know, that you are a former Haaretz columnist and that you were canceled. You were canceled because you were for the judicial reform, and they smeared you as a fascist, or I don't know what they called you. Anti-democratic.
No, they made me into an agent of Hungary, and of course they hate Hungary because Hungary is pro-Israeli. So in Haaretz, when a country is pro-Israeli, that is a
it's a sign of a character flaw.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so anyway, I just want to say that you have you have an axe to grind against Haaretz. So
I was writing against the Haaretz before I started writing for them, and when I wrote in the Haaretz against the Haaretz, I couldn't say I was writing against the Haaretz, so I had this euphemism, the leftist press. So I would write an article against the leftist press because I could not say this dumb anti-Semitic paper in which I write, and I don't say work because they didn't pay me, Mike.
it reminds me of
badge of honor.
Reminds me of Private Eye, an old British satirical magazine, that the libel laws in Britain are very stringent. And so you have to be very careful if you say anything about another person. You don't have to prove intent. If you just say something false and they can prove it, then you're guilty of libel. So they would never say, Private Eye would never say that they saw somebody drunk in the street. They would say, you know, if they saw a prominent figure, a politician or a businessman or something, and they wanted to signal that he was drunk, they would say tired and emotional. You know, we saw a very tired and emotional Gadi Taub on the street last night.
Yeah, so that was a fairly happy divorce. I think they caused damage to their own pluralistic image by firing me for all the. And by the way, the publisher said, he didn't say just that I was not to write in Haaretz. He said Gadi Taub's, i.e. pro-reform opinions, are illegitimate and should not be heard. These are the opinions of half the country.
He said this.
They're not just wrong.
He wrote it on Twitter, I believe. Did he not?
No, he said it on the Haaretz podcast, and then it was published on Twitter. But mind you, he didn't say we should not. He said these opinions should not be heard, and these are the opinions of half the population. And indeed, the Haaretz turned into in the struggle for the reform. We'll talk about it at some other point. Haaretz turned from a thinly disguised propaganda sheet into a vulgar propaganda sheet, no longer pretending to be journalistically professional. So, Mike, what is the dumbest take on the news this week?
Oh, the dumbest take on the news this week is this a British interviewer asking the Israeli spokesman if the fact that the hostage deal was 50 Israelis for 150 Palestinians, doesn't that prove that the Israelis believe that Palestinian lives are worth less than Israeli lives?
Matter not. Palestinian lives don't matter. Let's see it.
I was speaking to a hostage negotiator this morning. He made the comparison between the 50 hostages that Hamas has promised to release, as opposed to the 150 prisoners that are Palestinians that Israel has said that it will release. And he made the comparison between the numbers and the fact that, does Israel not think that Palestinian lives are valued as highly as Israeli lives?
That is an astonishing accusation. If we could release one prisoner for every one hostage, we would obviously do that. We are operating in horrific circumstances. We're not choosing to release these prisoners who have blood on their hands. We are talking about people who have been convicted of stabbing and shooting attacks. Notice the question of proportionality doesn't interest Palestinian supporters when they are able to get more of their prisoners out. But really, it is outrageous to suggest that the fact that we are willing to release prisoners who are convicted of terrorism offenses, more of them than we are getting our own innocent children back, somehow suggests that we don't care about Palestinian lives. Really, that's a disgusting accusation.
And this reminds me, Mike, of we talked about the craziness of academia. There was an academic here who said that the reason that Israelis do not rape Palestinian women in combat is because they're racist. Apparently, they only rape Jews. So Mike,
I'm sorry, you know. The contortions of the left-wing intellectual mind are really I don't know, they're amazing. Yet sometimes you just have to I just have to say, you know, God is great. God is great that he created this diversity, this strangeness. I mean, there's some plan working itself out here. I feel I have to believe. I have to believe. Otherwise, there has to be a reason for this highly intellectualized stupidity. There has to be a reason for it. It can't just be Nothing.
Our friend Dan Shiftan likes to say that anybody can be a fool, but to be a real idiot, you need a degree. And the problem with the radical woke is that you can't satirize them, you can't parody them, because
No,
they
I know they're
parody you.
no,
They're so
that's-
extreme. There's no logical way to go beyond what they do.
okay. Now we're going very far afield, but let's just end it here on this one. My friend Peter Boghossian, you know Peter,
Yeah.
who did he just on your point, he and his friend, they wrote these fake woke articles and got them accepted into, they built online personas of woke intellectuals, and then they got their articles accepted by academic journals, which supposedly are peer reviewed. And one of the things that he did is he took chunks of Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler and he put a woke wrapping around it, and he published parts of Mein Kampf
in a feminist journal. And what he did is replace Jews with men and Germans with women, and it all worked out like that.
And his university wanted, it was so embarrassing to the woke journals and to the woke movement that they wanted to punish him, and they were looking for a way to punish him. So what they did is they charged him with plagiarism, and so he plagiarized Adolf Hitler. So
know that.
So to further embarrass them, he didn't deny it. He didn't try to defend himself. He wrote a confession, and in every line of the confession, he wrote, "I plagiarized Adolf Hitler." So that if they quoted it at all, they would have to say that he plagiarized Adolf Hitler. So anyway, it just shows you how crazy they are.
Yeah, and in fact, Hitler's personal fortune was officially royalties from Mein Kampf. So that's actually true. That was the way he took money from the state for his own private accounts. And so plagiarism here may be a serious breach of German law. And so my dumbest take on the news this week is the Prime Minister of Ireland. In the beginning of this show, he screened footage of Emily Hand being released from Hamas captivity. And this is how this pro-Palestinian, anti-Israeli government or a head of government tweeted about it. "This is a day of enormous joy and relief for Emily Hand and her family. An innocent child who was lost has now been found and returned, and we breathe a massive sigh of relief. Our prayers have been answered." Readers added context under this tweet and said, Emily Hand was not lost. She was kidnapped, taken hostage by Hamas. Kidnapping is against the law. Being lost is not. So apparently they had to explain to the Prime Minister the difference. And by the way, I can mention that Conor McGregor, the controversial trash talker from the MMA, the champion of the MMA, wrote a scathing tweet against his Prime Minister, saying that she was not lost, she was kidnapped by an evil terrorist organization.
I wonder what prompted Conor McGregor. Well, I never heard of him getting involved in politics before. I wonder why he got involved here.
I think because of the stabbing in Dublin. Apparently, I think it was an Algerian who stabbed.
Oh, right. Yeah. Who stabbed the mother and the kid, right? And they had yes.
And while McGregor was on it, he said, "You and your corrupt media who didn't put on front pages the stabbing of these children." And he said, "What is it that you got against children?" or something like that. Anyway,
the Irish. One little point here, Gadi. The Irish in general tend to sympathize with the Palestinians against Israel. I've spent some time there, not in doing work, and had lots of discussions with people. That in the north they fly the loyalists, the That's the Protestant Orangemen. They fly the Israeli flag, and the Catholics in places like Ulster will fly the Israeli flag. The Catholics tend to identify with the Palestinians, and of course also during the Cold War, the IRA trained with the PLO. So there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, and Ireland was not on the side of the Allies in World War II. So this is, I guess, this has been our longest show, I'm guessing, and time flew.
Feels like
so,
it. It feels like it. But I had fun, and so what do we care about I don't care if the viewers liked it or not.
Exactly.
Because the whole my enjoy. I don't even care if you liked it.
They can go. You guys can go read the Haaretz if you don't like us.
Yeah.
That's fine with us.
All
Anyway, but
my
even if you
feelings.
don't like us, we are going to be here on Wednesday, like it or not. So thanks for watching. And Mike, traditionally you say,
what do I traditionally say? Farewell.
farewell. Say farewell.
Thank you for joining us, and let's see you back Wednesday. Forget that I just insulted you. Come back, please. I love you.
All right. Thank you very much for watching.